What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. I have to start this off with the fact that the Jets got a huge W over the Houston Texans last night. And for my truthers out there that aren't ready to quit on the Jets until the wheels fall off, I'm sure there's still some kind of analytical hope. I believe we are 10th in the AFC conference right now, with a couple of teams not that far ahead. So I guess theoretically, if you win out, there's a very real chance that you can get in. But nonetheless, per the Rooney Rule, the New York Jets will have to search for head candidates. Either way, whether Jeff Ulbrich puts on a clinic the remainder of these 9 games or so for the New York Jets, or we continue to flounder and thus the need for one. But today we are talking about one of the first former head coaches, for my guys that want somebody that's actually experienced and can hit the ground running instead of having to figure out the nuts and bolts of the entire operation. Former head coach from the Tennessee Titans, Mike Vrabel. And this is a name that honestly, as I continue to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, I got more intrigued with him, right? His ouster isn't too dissimilar from Robert Saleh, from the fact that maybe he's not the best candidate here. But what I'm getting at is that a lot of fans that I heard chat about it, a lot of the longtime beat writers for the Titans weren't necessarily shocked that the move was made, because again, he ended his last 2 seasons with a pretty bad losing streak. But more so the fact that he changed the energy, he changed the culture, he changed a lot of the deficiencies that were going on with the Titans. And for a team that still never really had elite talent at any position other than necessarily some spots on defense and, of course, Derrick Henry, he was able to take them quite the distance. And then him bringing on some extra duties and stuff kind of, attributed to his downfall. But let's get into some of the things here, and I'll try to keep this from being all over. First, let's start off with the history, right? And for starters as well, I will say that him being 49 years old, again, is a bit of a plus. I don't want a guy that, I've heard Pete Carroll's name out there, for example, and I think he's 73. I don't want a guy that realistically maybe has 2 or 3 years in him, right? A Bruce Arians type run, even if it is highly successful or elite, and then we're looking all over again with maybe no internal options. But with Mike Vrabel being 49 years old, that is a huge plus. Now, you also have to mention, as part of his coaching history, that one of the other things people would love, former player, a former NFL linebacker, 14 years within the NFL. All he did was rack up 3 Super Bowls, was a former All-Pro. You also saw him recently inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame. And so with all of those accolades, I know one of the old tropes is that great players don't necessarily make great coaches. And from everything that I've heard, player testimony, fans, etc., again, it seems like anything could be further from the truth with Mike Vrabel specifically. So now to get into his actual coaching history, once his playing days were over, he ended up at OSU, Ohio State University, as a linebacker coach, then became a defensive line coach, and he even had a lot of shout-outs or credits to his name when it came to recruiting efforts for the program. And as we know, OSU, wide receiver university, also known for finding some freak athletes on like the defensive side that they're able to coach up in various years. Then moves to the pro realm, right? Pretty quickly, by the way, I might add. Houston Texans, he becomes a linebackers coach there, and then gets promoted to defensive coordinator before making the jump to the Tennessee Titans, where he stayed for 6 years as their head coach, putting together a 54-45 regular season record, which was good for about 0.545%. In other words, he's winning a little more than half of his games or so. And his postseason record, not necessarily as great, right? 2-3 record, 0.400. But still, it would be the most success that we've seen since the days of Rex Ryan, right? So the fact that he's able to not only get there, and again, this can't be understated, with teams that didn't have a plethora of elite talent at many of these positions, I think speaks huge volumes to him. Now, he did have a couple of coaching candidates, that left him to go on to have success, but you're not talking about a world-class coaching staff that he's necessarily put together and things. And more often than not, I find in the research that I've done that many people credit Mike Vrabel over saying his defensive coordinator did an excellent job or his OC was doing an excellent job. In fact, one of the ironic things is that we have most of his former staff on our current roster. So Mike Vrabel really is an intriguing guy from the standpoint that not only is he bringing accolades, right, a former coach of the year in 2021, which, by the way, was also a year that he had Tannehill looking like an MVP and was also the year that he was the AFC's number one seed. But you bring in the fact that he has the experience from a player standpoint, and we'll get into this, but he has a couple mottos, a couple consistent themes about his coaching style and personality that I think would just be a tremendous fit on this staff and something that's honestly been missing for quite a number of years, right? You've had Todd Bowles, Robert Saleh, Adam Gase again. I think more so with Todd Bowles and Robert here. A lot of guys that preached accountability didn't necessarily see it from the public perspective, right? I think a lot of guys like the fact that Rex Ryan kind of chided or poked and stabbed at some of his players when they really weren't performing well or didn't necessarily hold his tongue when it came to calling guys out post-game, after post-game losses. And maybe even on occasion in post-games wins where he wasn't necessarily excited about the effort level and different things of that was going on, right? Mike Vrabel, very much the same way, and is one of the things that would intrigue me about if he can even get an interview because he's known to be a bit raw, right? A bit of the sandpaper type when it just comes to he's his own guy. He's a guy's guy. But what he believes, what he preaches, what he wants to emphasize for his team, he's going to make sure that gets across. And if that happens to clash with Woody Johnson, if that happens to clash with whoever his new GM is, which you'd imagine the GM picks him, right? If we end up going a new route other than Joe Douglas, that could cause some issues and some friction pretty quickly. But outside of that, just to touch on this as we continue to dive into this, you think about the quarterbacks that he dealt with over his 6 years, Ryan Tannehill, Malik Willis, Joshua Dobbs. None of these guys inspire oohs and ahs if you're on your roster. Ryan Tannehill is obviously the most significant name and really a guy that we considered as maybe a great backup option when a great bridge quarterback, I would say, probably at best, right? And obviously he's on the downside of his career, but a bridge quarterback. When it came to those conversations about who can we bring in here to let Zach Wilson have a back seat, but still we're not calling it quits on the season. This is a guy that can go out and help us reach the playoffs and potentially a Super Bowl, but none of those names are inspiring in any way. And kind of to the degree that we talked about with Ben Johnson. With Vrabel here having a defensive background, you'd expect more consistency and stuff on the defensive side. But even offensively, one of the things that I absolutely fell in love with was he also was a CEO-style head coach. And probably one that was even better than Robert Saleh was coming out of the gate. There were examples I heard and saw about Mike Vrabel leading meetings on both sides of the ball, offensively, defensively. He's even in there with special teams, but he's bringing coachable teaching video, and he's the one that's up there speaking the most, calling out things that he likes to see from a fundamental technique standpoint that's going to work for the scheme they're looking to employ. And I think that's huge. It's absolutely huge. But with that said, he has such a diverse coaching tree under him, coming from Bill O'Brien, that he's kind of this mix of new school elements when you want to talk about being able to mix in things like motion and stuff, which we essentially throw out right now under Nathaniel Hackett's scheme right now. But he's old school. He likes his ground and pound, and I'm sure a lot of that had to do with Derrick Henry. But just in general, he seems to be a guy that loves to run the ball, but he loves to see his quarterback be extremely efficient and effective out there. And so I think you kind of get this combination of, Rex Ryan meets, maybe a poor man's Ben Johnson, when it comes to looking for Jared Goff is kind of the quarterback that comes to mind, right? He is the optimal guy to run a scheme that a Ben Johnson or a Mike Vrabel wants to run here. And so maybe we can find that. We do have some intriguing quarterbacks on the roster. When you want to talk about Tyrod, when you want to talk about Jordan Travis being out there, and when you want to talk about if we end up with a high draft pick, having, guys like Cam Ward out there that potentially could get picked up by the New York Jets. So I'm intrigued with this. Old school ground and pound is something I love. Obviously, it's still a passing league, but all that means to me is that he's a guy that's going to want to make sure every touch coming out of the backfield matters and is coming with some potency and impact. But he does have a varied approach to getting the job done. I've seen him mention this on numerous occasions. He's not married to the idea of having a West Coast scheme or a power run or a vertical stretch the field, a spread offense, anything of that matter. Whoever he picks to get the job done as his OC is going to share the same vision and concepts that Mike Vrabel is looking for. So he's a guy that coming in, I can see when he's looking at candidates for the offensive coordinator position, he's just looking to see who sells the dreams the best and potentially how that matches up with the roster right out of the gate, right? And I don't think you can ask for too much better than that. But getting into a couple highlights and some different things here, right? When you want to talk about the coach himself, Rodney Harrison, former peer of his, right? A former player he shared the field with, called him, said he's a good asshole. I love him. He's one of the best assholes I know. And I think this speaks to the fact that Mike Vrabel is a little bit more of a conversationalist that doesn't have a filter, right? If it's on his mind, he's going to get it out there. And then he's highlighted it himself. I'm paraphrasing here, but he's talked about having fights, having dysfunction, having arguments, not seeing the same sides. He's instantly getting over it, and he's moving on about his day as long as they came to some kind of understanding, some kind of medium, regardless of the differences. And I love that factor. May the best idea win. It's the approach I take at work. It's an approach mentors to share with me, and I really think you always get the best out of things when you're taking it from that standpoint. Arthur Smith, head coach, he mentioned that if you're sensitive, it's not for you. And I think this applies more so to the field. It applies more so to Mike Vrabel's habits of calling out players. And it's not just calling guys out on the practice field. It's not just calling guys out on game day. It's highlighting guys. It's calling them out when it comes to press conferences and things. It's something I always appreciated about guys. I think people try to do too much of the politics and the word games when it comes to pressers. But if he's, if I can imagine if a beat writer is asking him, hey, we've seen Sauce Gardner struggling lately. What's going on? He'll pinpoint. He looks like he's reaching too much, right? Also, don't love the tackling. I don't like the fact that he looks like he's getting more grabby than he's ever been the first 2 years, etc., etc. I could see him rolling out, clearly demonstrating without giving up the weaknesses per se, what's causing the issue and maybe not necessarily how they plan on fixing it, but the fact that it's going to get fixed. And another thing to highlight here is that there was numerous players, numerous coaches, numerous examples of Mike Vrabel being a very hands-on coach. And if you recall the fact that he's leading execution, fundamental technique videos in the special teams defensive and offensive rooms, he's going out there and showing guys in real time if they can't figure it out for themselves from video review and getting out there on the field. He's showing guys, this is what I'm looking for, and he's staying out there until he feels comfortable with them that they're getting things done. So when you want to talk about having rookies or bringing in certain drafts where maybe you could shoot for the stars from a traits and athletic standpoint, and maybe not guys that are ready to fire off the ball day one, you get really hyped up with a coach like this. The fact that you don't have to worry about biting the tongue for feelings is something that would be refreshing for me as a guy that's pretty blunt myself. I like that aspect, right? And in New York, you have to be tough. Even if the coach is trying to spare you the rod, thinking it's going to do you justice, the media will eat you up. So better to hear it from the coach, the guy that wants to see you succeed, the guy that's hoping he can help you all achieve the highest of heights. Get it from him, the guy that can also offer you those same solutions. And I think that would be huge for a team like the Jets that have been prone to not playing up to their talent level, not having a level of consistency, prone to a ton of mistakes, penalties all over the place. You can even take a look at this Texans game again where we won. I want to say it was 21-13 final score, but it really should have been 28-13 at minimal when you talk about the young rookie Malachi Corley dropping the ball out of the end zone before even finishing out the play. Things like that just don't happen under Mike Vrabel's watch. So it would be amazing to see what a New York Jets team with the level of talent that we have can get done with the guy that's going to eliminate a lot of the dumbest plays that we've seen over many, many years now, right? If you want to pick up and take a look at kind of current day events for him, just so you get a feel for what he's doing, he's not just sitting on the couch. Since his firing, he got picked up by the Browns as a consultant, and this is very much so akin to Robert Saleh and what he's doing with Green Bay, where he's over there as a coaching and personnel consultant, and he helps them out for everything up to game day. On game day, he's chilling out. He's watching how the game plan, etc., that they crafted is worked out. Obviously not well. I think the Browns are also 2-6. But still, he's a guy that I heard a ton of raving reviews about from all of the players, as well as from Kevin Stefanski himself. Leading into the regular season and even since over the course of the season. One of the biggest compliments from Stefanski himself, and something that should also get us, perk the ears and get us excited, is he called him an energy multiplier. And this is something that we've heard personally. Press game, post-press game conference, after post-game, after post-game, even into practices, things like joint practices in the off seasons, certain mini camps. A lack of energy, right? A lack of energy to start the game, a lack of energy coming out of second halves when you're down, even if it's not by double digits or a ton of points. So Mike Vrabel being a guy that can always keep that at a high level without it feeling like an emotional roller coaster, big plus. 4 of his 6 seasons as a head coach, he led with a winning percentage, right? Started off the first 2 with 9 and 7 wins, and then he was able to go out there and I believe stack a 10-win season and a 12-win season leading up to being that first team in the AFC in 2021. One of the models, let's get into some of the stuff that you potentially would see on the New York Jets wall as we get into the 2025 season. He wants to rely on fundamentals and technique to raise the team's floor as opposed to looking for traits, looking for certain things that stand out and trying to find that ultra rare player. And this is really a catalyst, if you will, or kind of a culmination of his personal experience being in the NFL, where he was never a guy that had crazy, ridiculous traits and he just played up to them. He was a guy that had just enough, maybe even above average from what I saw, ability to play out there, but then he pieced it all together mentally. He pieced it together fundamentally, and that culmination of talent, skill, perception, etc., really allowed him to thrive in the NFL. Of course, anybody that walks into that building with multiple Super Bowls should get this fan base excited. A prime reason why we were very hyped to get Joe Douglas in the general manager role, for example, right? So model-wise, I love that. Fundamentals and technique can always get you by, right? It's like the old saying, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I think Mike Vrabel is kind of a living embodiment of that example. Now, of course, the fact that he knows all sides of the ball is a huge plus. One of the things that may go underrated is the fact that during the Chiefs' kind of continuing rise of the peak, right, with Mahomes getting over there and seeing them go off for crazy, points on a weekly basis and stuff, the Titans always seem to have figured out the number for him, and a lot of that was game preparation, preparedness, execution. And that is something that we've seen very little of here. So seeing him be able to stop one of the hottest teams whenever they were able to meet up and really take away a lot of what they did extremely well when it came to deep ball passing, making it hard for guys like Tyreek Hill who operated and were able to find space easily, taking away a lot of those passing zones, and then, of course, being able to stop the run. Huge pluses. Third time, if he can find a coaching staff to piece together very well, it bodes well for us that Mike Vrabel looks inside before he goes outward. So 3 times out of his career, at least in the first 5 years, he hired for the offensive coordinator role from within. So I look forward to that if we can find a way, again, to piece together and establish a really good offensive coaches throughout that side of the staff. But you do also have to take the good with the bad, right? And so when you take a look at how things turned out with him looking for a new job, he lost 18 of his last 24 games. Any owner in the league would be highly concerned, but then, of course, almost making it to the promised land and not getting there. And the only reason they really didn't make it was because Ryan Tannehill ended up throwing, I think, 3 picks, or ultimately having 3 turnovers of some fashion, ended up really dooming them. And again, they didn't have a ton, right? It was Tannehill, it was, Corey Davis, I believe, for a moment there. And then I want to say they had Delaney Walker towards the end of his time. Derrick Henry, of course, and then you had some guys on the offensive line. Enough pieces, but it seemed like that was a team that definitely overachieved under Mike Vrabel. A lot of the fans, again, a lot of the beat writers seemed like they were pissed, or they had direct blame that they can point to, which they felt was maybe unfair for firing a guy like Mike Vrabel. When you take a look at the injuries that piled up those last couple of years, they were right up there with the Jets for a good portion of time, where they were leading or at the NFL's they were at or leading the NFL in terms of injuries and having guys come in to have to replace them on a week in and week out basis. And so you can't really get the job done if you have to continually bring in a new player, try to get them to understand a decent amount of plays, get them out there for that, hope they can execute well. It just makes your offense and defense a lot more predictable, a lot harder to try to coach, outclass, outmaneuver anybody else on the other side, especially when there's no, huge names or anything they need to game plan for. Not saying name value means everything, but more so just the fact that, if you have a ton of tape and stuff out there for a reason, instead of having to pick guys up off the street, it just makes the job a lot easier. One of the things, we'll end this on a highlight, right? The course of his tenure as a whole, you take a look at his 6 years. I think a lot of these numbers kind of sums up pretty well what we could potentially expect from him. And I would say even more so because he's starting off, if he comes into this building, with better pieces than he really ever had at the position before. Let's take it from the top. He ranked 15th in offensive EPA. And again, this is over his 6-year tenure with the Titans. 17th in defensive EPA. He was 9th in scoring defense, 14th in offensive EPA per play, 2nd in rushing offense, 4th in rushing defense, and most importantly, 1st in red zone efficiency. And I think that matters the most for a team like the New York Jets, who have never been able to consistently punch in the ball. And this is even during Rex Ryan's days. Outside of maybe a year here or there, we've never done a great job of, if we get 6, 7, 8 opportunities, we're converting on 1 or 2. You want to see, the job that Mike Vrabel has done, where you're converting on almost 50, 60% of those attempts down there. And at that point, you're putting up 28 to, 30 plus points pretty consistently, and you don't have to worry so much, especially with the defense that we have and some of the personnel over there on that side of the ball. You don't have to worry about having to be absolutely picture perfect in order to give your team a chance, right? So I would love this. I still would be a huge fan of hiring an offensive guy first. But if you're not only going to go the defensive route in terms of the next head coach again, to follow that up too, get a guy like Mike Vrabel where I think he can be that CEO type guy that's successful. I think he just kind of got a bad hand dealt to him the last 2 years. New GM coming in, ownership kind of waning on him. GM obviously wanted to get in a guy of his own, and maybe Mike Vrabel just rubbing too many people the wrong way as he looked to try to turn the ship the right way over there. But I still strongly believe that this could be a situation for the next whoever the next head coach is that hits the ground running with this roster. So I'll say that to say, let me know what you guys think. I know a lot of you were very hyped about Mike Vrabel potentially being an option for us. And for what it's worth, with any of these top head coaching candidates, they're probably going to have their pick of the litter, right? And so I would expect if you get a name that is known, like a Mike Vrabel, a Ben Johnson, a Tom Monken, whoever it is, more than likely it means that they picked us, which means they have a vision in place, a plan. They believe they can get the job done, especially with whoever the GM that gets paired with is, Joe Douglas or a new one. And that will speak volumes, right? I think they are willing to stake their career and their reputation on being able to figure it out with the Jets, because this could be a place where tons of careers go to die, right? And more often than not, you see these guys move on and have success elsewhere, even though it's back in their former role, but they end up finding a way to probably get another opportunity just because the Jets are that inept, and of course the Woody Johnson conversation and all that. But ultimately, again, let me know what you guys think. I know Mike Vrabel's a fun one for you guys, and I'll catch you again. Peace.